Hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming out on a glorious Friday morning to come spend some time with us to talk about the elections in general. So my name is Rachel Tamarvian. I, along with Alex Mava, am the co-director of the Digital Humanities Consortium. And we are super excited about this next event, which is election reporting in a digital age. And if you have been following the news about any of this stuff is pretty pervasive in terms of how we experience elections. So we are very excited today to bring Elizabeth Muños to campus, who is our special guest. She is the digital producer at ABC7 Los Angeles. And to help see this event, we have Kristine Pascual, and I'm going to actually, she is a comms major with a multimedia journalism option, and she's also the editor-in-chief of the Bronco Guide, as well as the president of the Society of Professional Journalism. So we're really excited to have her MC this event. And so the format that we're going to do this in is that we'll start off with questions up here, and then we're going to open it up to you. So as you're listening, you have questions that come to mind, go ahead and keep track of those, because we'll open it up to the audience. And without further ado, we can go ahead and have a round of applause for our guests.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, of course. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you. Excited to talk to you all.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's informative. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So to start off, can we learn a little bit about your background? Can you share a little bit about why you decided to pursue a career in journalism?
Yeah. So I graduated BA in communications with a emphasis in print from Cal State Fullerton in 2015. While in school, I wrote on the Digital Times, student newspaper for several years. Started off as sort of an assistant copywriter, and then moved up to features, and eventually graduated. I was always interested in writing. My original goal was to do sort of long-form journalism, sort of magazine-type writing. That sort of shifted over the years, and I ended up working at ABC7. Before that, I was at the public radio station, the NPR radio station, based in Pasadena, KPCC. I was there for a few years before I ended up at ABC7, and I've been in my current position for almost 6 years. But I've always been interested in writing and sort of tapping into society in general, what people are feeling or thinking, and important information that they should know, and that has brought me here for you all.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about what your responsibilities are at ABC7 and your position?
Yeah, as I said, I'm a digital news producer, so that means I produce everything digital. I write, for the most part, and disseminate all of our reporting and stories on every digital platform that you can think of. That includes our own website, all social media platforms, including TikTok, community, YouTube Shorts, Facebook, Instagram, X, or formerly Twitter. And so everything that you see online from ABC7, I have some sort of part in it, along with my small but mighty team. So yeah.
Being a digital producer in this day and age, what sorts of challenges do you see yourself facing?
I would say that a big part of it is just sort of trying to keep up with the fast-moving news cycle. When I was a journalism student, it wasn't something that I foresaw. When I say that, I mean I didn't expect for social media and any digital platform really to become as pervasive as it is now. So I would say a big challenge is just trying to keep up with that. The news cycles move constantly, and they're always changing and moving from one thing to the next, especially around election season. which you all know is quickly coming up. So that's one thing. I can never know what to expect on a daily basis. There's always news happening, and I'm required to shift my attention one way or the other. And I'm sure, as people who consume any sort of digital media, you guys might feel the same. It's always this or that, and you're always turning your head. That's sort of the same for me. And then I'd also say that trying to balance my own personal beliefs and opinions, life in general, while trying to be a responsible and informative member of the media is a constant, balancing act. So yeah.
I'm not sure when you graduated from college, but thinking about back then versus now, like what are the differences in election coverage besides, the prevalence of social media?
So I graduated in 2015. Yeah, like I said, social media was not as big as it was back then as it is now. I would say that, coverage in general of any news seems to have gotten a little bit more contentious, a little bit more polarizing, and there's been a mounting pressure from news media organizations in general to, uphold themselves to certain standards, and rightfully so.
Do you think that the media's influence on public perception and opinion during this election season has grown or declined?
I think it's pretty easy to see that it's grown, for sure. I can't exactly pinpoint, what happened. To my best knowledge, I would say around 2016, I covered a few election cycles. I was around for the 2016 election cycle, and if I had to pinpoint, something, it would be that election cycle specifically. That's when we, got a candidate who sort of changed the game going forward, and sort of normalized a sense of political polarization, very strong language being used and targeting certain groups, and that just kept happening in general. I would say that was amplified by the consistent rise of social media and any digital platform, where all of that was sort of just visible on a scale that had never been before. So media's influence on the public.
Because the media is so polarized nowadays, how do you find yourself avoiding any biases?
Keeping that balance is something that I take very seriously in my own personal work, which I can really, I can speak mostly to my own work and my own personal duties. I try to always remain impartial in my work. I never want to sway anything, and I can say that's the same for a lot of my colleagues and people that I work with, the station in general. It is a constant goal. Oftentimes it's not perceived that way by consumers and the public. And rightfully so, sometimes those concerns and those opinions are valid, and I believe that news media in general should listen to their audience and take heed what they say. So that's what I always try to mirror, to embody. I always want to provide the most informative, factual, and accurate information that will serve the public, anyone who consumes anything I write, or anything the news media disseminates in general.
Yeah, and I'm about to open up the floor right now, but I do have an additional question, just kind of like a personal one. But I know a lot of my friends and I are about to graduate in the spring, and we're all hoping to find some sort of job in the journalism industry. So, do you have any pieces of advice for us who are looking to do so?
I would say, I started off as an intern. I would say that's probably one of the best steps you can take. Try to get an internship. Anybody who's interested in this field. It can be hard to be tapped into the news cycle and all of that in general, but I think if you stay in that and you're dedicated to it, I think that'll show when you go to interview, or if that sparks ideas in you, and pitching stories is always great. So I think prospective employees who show an enthusiasm for the field is always a plus. And then also think about what kind of news you want to get into. There's a lot of different sorts of media organizations. Me personally, a big part of my job focuses on breaking news, local breaking news, and national. But then there are other organizations that focus on more in-depth reporting, more long-form things that sort of tap into the community. So it's really about the type of writing that you want to do and the type of stories that you want to be involved with. I'm not an election reporter per se. I do touch election stories, political stories in general. But if that's something that you're interested in, I think there's always a need for responsible and enthusiastic people who just want to report the news and let people know what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. I'm definitely more of like where in the beginning where you were like more into magazine and long form. I feel like right now I'm in that mindset, but like who knows where I'm going to be after college. Does anyone else in the audience have any questions right now?
I'm curious, you talked earlier about finding the balance between holding back your opinion but telling accurate coverage. How do you find that balance when maybe like a politician is saying something that's completely false?
Thank you for that question. It's a good question. I'm human, and it can enrage me on a personal level, even spark some emotions of hopelessness and just hopelessness in general, and an anger for the public. I think they deserve better, but in terms of my reporting and my coverage of the things that are said and the events that happen, I can only report what is said and what happens, and provide any context and information that is needed, much needed. For example, the recent presidential debate that we had a few weeks ago, I didn't personally work that night, but I did have to do some follow-up coverage after the fact. And, I'm sure you guys heard that, or, saw a lot of criticism that popped up during and after that debate about the fact checking that was done solely and mostly on one candidate as opposed to the other. And, I think the moderators of that debate did a very great job. And because the statements that were being made were just so outlandish and not true. And obviously there was criticism because of that. And there was fact checking for the other candidate as well. It just wasn't done in real time on TV. And so a lot of those negative comments that I saw personally, you could tell that those people didn't really seek more information. because if they went to our website, they would have seen that there was a whole article, a whole breakdown of both candidates. And the other candidate did need some fact checking. X statement was true, but it needs this context, or actually this was a little bit skewed. And so that information is there. You just have to look for it, I think. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. So you talked about wanting to keep an unbiased perspective, and because, especially when thinking about politics and things that are so polarizing, where do you see the role of pure fact reporting and perspective giving in reporting? And where should we look to do one over the other, or where do they each have their place?
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. Again, I can only speak to me personally. That's something that I struggle with a lot, because I would say that my own personal beliefs are pretty radical, progressive, I would say. And so I think we should always strive to be factual and accurate, but at the same time, like you said, sometimes there's more needed. If I'm able to do that, I'll always do that, as far as my title goes and my position within the news station. But I do think those conversations are happening wider, with ABC News in general. ABC7 Los Angeles is a small local subsection of that. So I'm not 100% involved in those bigger conversations, but I do think they're very, very important. And there are certainly situations where, as news reporters, you have to rise to the occasion of, informing the public that, there's something bigger happening here, for lack of a better phrase.
Hi, we have a question from the chat. Amir is asking, how can bystanders discern between harmful statements and rhetoric in political debates, especially when fact-checking may be unreliable or manipulated?
I would say seek information. I think there's a lot of information that's widely available. Multiple news organizations trying to provide exactly that. And to be honest, that may not always be the thing that ends up trending on the social media platforms that you might be on. So it does take a little bit of work on the consumer's part to inform themselves. I think that information is there. It just might always be at the forefront of any sort of social media platform in general.
Yeah, my question is regarding to technology, seeing how it's advancing so fast. And obviously social media is the thing that's had a big impact on news nowadays, right? But where do you see it going in the future? Like, for example, the rise of AI, right? Do you see that having any impact on the way news is covered or done in the future?
Just like I mentioned before, I didn't really see us being here now, us being here with, TikTok and people getting primarily, or a lot of the younger generations getting their news from TikTok, and news in general for the general public. I can say that it's something that is being watched and being just in the back of a lot of news people's minds. We don't know what it's going to do or what it's going to evolve into. But, depending on what happens with it, we'll reach that when it comes to it. But I can't really say how it'll turn out. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I have a question. What's your opinion on short form content and, like you mentioned, younger generations getting their information and news from TikTok?
I think it's okay to get some information from there. That's how a lot of news organizations reach those sectors of the public. But I do think that that's not all they need to know. There's always going to be more information that you can have and learn. So like I said before, just searching for it is very important, but I do think it's not a bad thing that the younger generation can sort of get news from this specific platform and, you know, maybe galvanize them into wanting to be more involved or wanting to seek more information. I think it could be a great sort of catalyst for that. But as a standalone thing, I'm not exactly sure if it's the best to solely get your news from that, one platform, especially short form where it may not have all the context, all the perspective, all the history. That can be crucial to know in this day and age.
So you brought up TikTok. Part of that too is the algorithm that people like. If you like a TikTok, there's an algorithm set up for you where it's consistently like you're the same takes or same perspectives as the previous TikToks. And sometimes it won't offer you like an alternative perspective or like a rebuttal perspective, to say the least. So maybe like, is there a way we can improve that algorithm in our social media where it still presents you with the narrative that you agree with, but also presents you with like an alternative perspective, if that makes sense?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a very great point. Confirmation bias is very real. And I think it's something that maybe not a lot of people are aware of, but yes, when you like something on TikTok, it will keep feeding you the same stuff, the same point of view. I think that sort of came to light during the 2016 election. And, since then, these big social media companies, Meta, have been under intense scrutiny for that. They just questioning their work to sort of mitigate that confirmation bias. And that's why I think, again, it's important to not solely rely on one platform or one string of videos that you're constantly being fed. Like anything else, seek information. It's always out there. But that is a very real thing that happens to a lot of people, and it's important to be aware of it, for sure.
Continuing on the algorithm question, do you think it's appropriate for news agencies to become more competitive in the algorithm by, doing little things that appeal to it, like get ready with me's are being used to advertise products? Do you think news agencies should become more competitive in displaying information by using more standard social media formats, or do you think it should stay purely to news, just like the straight story?
Me personally, this is just me on a very personal level, I think that political advocacy is always important. And just sort of informing the public in general is very important, and reaching as many people as possible. I think there are times for both. I can't say that, there are reporters, or there's sort of more of an effort to have reporters on social media have more of a presence, and amplify their voice, their authoritative voice as a news professional. And I think that can sort of aid in that a little bit. But I think a mix of both is great. I think, news organizations should report straight facts, and then, you have people that are reporting the news that can offer perspective and context, and doing that in a more informative form on those platforms is, I think, can only help.
Hi, my name is Brandon. I was just wondering, in your personal opinion on mainstream journalism, do you think it's more constructive or destructive?
Good question. Thank you. I think there are times where it can be both. I personally strive to always be constructive. I never want to sort of contribute to divisiveness and polarization, political polarization. And so that is something that I always try to do in my work. And I know a lot of people around me that I work with do that as well. When you scale it out and you look at the big picture, yeah, sometimes it's easier. You can see the times where it's being destructive. I'm not sure if that's intentional. It's never intentional with me or the people that I work with. But I think it's a real thing that can happen.
So I was just curious on what your stance is on freedom of speech and misinformation in journalism, and especially with the advent of social media. So I think that a sort of poignant thing that a lot of people brought up is this idea that social media being so widespread allows for information to spread so much quicker. You can end up with a lot of issues that didn't exist in previous forms of journalism, especially the spread of misinformation from people in high positions of political power. So I think back to maybe a couple of years ago, when politicians have been, for example, banned on Twitter for presenting misinformation as political fact. And I'm curious if you think the burden is more on the individual to make sure that the information that they have is sound, or if it should be on the content publisher to ensure that the information being presented is sound, and whether or not that's a violation of the freedom of speech to maybe like ban someone on Twitter for saying something wrong.
Specifically, in recent years, there has been more of a move towards making decisions about what certain political candidates or just representatives in general say. And I think that if this is just me personally again, I think it can be dangerous if there is no fact-checking happening, if there's no sort of checking in general happening on that. That can infringe, I guess you could say it infringes on the First Amendment right, freedom of speech. So that's a very heavy topic. I do think there are times where it's needed. You need to sort of pull the lens a little bit back and be like, this is more dangerous than it is constructive to society in general. So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question because it's pretty deep.
That's cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
For students who haven't made up their minds on ballot measures or maybe not who they want to vote for president, but other politicians running for office in their local elections and things like that, how can they rely on the media, or what should they be looking for to help form their decisions?
That's a good question. Thank you. I can tell you that the information is always readily available. I can't say how many times I've seen stories on a specific proposition or ballot measure or a very small, low-level local election race, and all of those are very important. And I know those stories exist. So I feel like if you wanted that information, it can certainly be found. I know my organization disseminates them, breakdowns of propositions, because they can be very, very confusing, and it's not always easy to know which way to vote. So yeah, again, just seek the information. It's there. And if that information isn't provided to you, if you can't find it anywhere, I would encourage you to maybe, we receive a lot of feedback from the public through just direct messages, typo alerts, like anything. And if we see enough people asking for a certain information that hasn't been put together yet for you guys, I know that it will be, once we see that either people are Googling for something specific, we can see what you're searching for, and try and come up with that information and put it into a cohesive form where you'll be informed and be able to make a better decision. It does take work to vote. It's not easy to vote. Myself, when I get my ballot, I'll spend days just going through it, trying to research both sides of any given candidate, any of my local elections or statewide local propositions. It does take work, for sure.
We have another question from the chat asking how can we know if fact checking is truly reliable? Or I guess evolve from that, like how do we ensure that the fact checking we're getting is unbiased?
All I can say is look at the sourcing for the information that you're getting. Whether it's the specific media organization or the political expert that's providing the information. Everyone has, a lot of people can't have agendas. So I think it's important to always take a step back and look at who's giving you this information and then decide for yourself whether you believe it or not, and then go from there.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm wondering how you navigate uncertainty as a journalist. So I think that there are probably times where you don't know exactly the information, even though it would be super relevant to what it is you're trying to report on. So either maybe both personally and in news organizations, what's the strategy for navigating uncertainty?
I would say in the newsroom in general, I think it's very collaborative. There are always people that are hungry to find this information and sort of address any uncertainty that there is, maybe just in the public in general, or just specifically in our newsroom. Conversations just happening with multiple levels of people in the newsroom. Myself, I ask a lot of questions. If I'm not sure, if I feel uncomfortable reporting something that I don't feel is maybe lacking context or just maybe a little bit questionable, I'll always bring up those issues. And then, we can discuss and sort of reshape what is disseminated to the public. Just trying to make sure that it's not uncertain anymore, that people will understand what we're saying and what's happening.
Do you have a particular approach to reporting?
That's an interesting question because I'm not exactly a person who gets a byline or who's known to the public. I don't have a face online or TV. I always try and be accurate. There are times where I find mistakes or discrepancies, and I'll bring those up. And sometimes there'll be my colleagues will not have been aware of those things that I catch or what have you. So that's my approach is always to be accurate and as unbiased as I can be.
Do you have like a particular schedule like in your role, or like does every single workday look different for you?
So I've for some time, for a few years, I've been on a 4 a.m. to 1 p.m. schedule. It's quite grueling at times. So as a person who sort of kicks off the day at 4 a.m., there is a certain amount of pressure to get the station's day going, to sort of tap in and see what's happening, what needs to be immediately reported. Like I said before, we focus heavily on breaking news. So if anything happened overnight, I'll turn my attention to that. But I also don't know what's going to happen on any given day. Sometimes there'll be stories that are constantly evolving for a few days or maybe a few weeks, whether it's a court case or just a local crime case, and that during those times you do get a little bit of more direction of the type of coverage that you'll be doing over the next few days or weeks. But things are always happening. And I'm required to sort of shift my attention at a moment's notice if something major does happen. And that happens pretty commonly. But yeah.
Because you have such a crazy schedule, like 4 a.m., I could never. But how do you balance work life and personal life and kind of prioritizing your mental health?
Thank you for that question. That is a constant struggle for me because, a lot of the stories that are out there that we report on are tragic or just very, very sad. It can be a lot of doom and destruction. So, when I'm off the clock, I'm off the clock. I will say I do have to stay tapped in to a certain level, because if I don't, and because the news cycle changes so much, 8 hours can pass and I'll pop back in and be like, well, what happened? And like, I feel myself trying to catch up. So if I don't at least keep one foot in the door, I feel like I can't do my job effectively. So I prioritize my personal life by just sort of finding joy in the little things. I think that's something in general that is a good practice, not just for me, but then when my vacations come around, I can sort of unplug pretty much wholly and recharge myself so that when I get back in it, I can do my job effectively. My schedule now is much more consistent than it used to be. I've worked all shifts. I've worked night shifts, overnight shifts, like midday, and they all come with their own sets of challenges.
You mentioned the news being very doom and gloom. Has it been your experience that the news is consciously or even unconsciously directly incentivized to keep promoting that kind of doom and gloom for retention? And if so, is there some way that can be positive, or it can, even if it is doom and gloom, that exposes us to the things that we need to know, even if they're uncomfortable? What's your perspective on that?
I'll say that a lot of the coverage that is put out for you guys is at least in part informed by the audience. If we see people are clicking on a specific story or searching for something very specific that just happens to be sad and awful, that story is going to get put out. And more often than not, those are the stories that get the most attention. We can see the numbers. And that's not to say that good news doesn't exist. I certainly see that on a weekly, if not daily basis. And the sad thing to me is that those stories don't always top the charts, so to speak. For whatever reasoning, I can't say people just read what they want to read and see what they want to see. But yeah, we'll see if people are searching for something specific, whether it's a shooting that happened or a death or anything that involves some sort of tragedy. People just want to know what happened, I find. And if we present that information, they're going to read it. And yeah. Not to say I'm blaming the audience at all. It's just a sort of trend that I've noticed and can be unfortunate at times, because I do think that there are certain stories that maybe don't get as much attention as they should, that I believe they should, and don't go viral, so to speak, and all that stuff. But it's a very, very real thing.
My question is, so say an introvert like myself wants to work at a news station, but I don't want to be in front of the cameras. What other options are there on working in that field which don't involve being in front of the cameras?
I would say you're very much like me. I was never interested in being in front of a camera. And so I guess that's sort of why I ended up where I am today. Like I said before, I don't have a face that's seen by the public or even a name that's seen by the public. And so, you know, a job like mine might be a good thing to do, but, you know, there are lots of departments within a newsroom, like our assignment desk, which are tasked with sort of getting information that's reportable, whether it's contacting, you know, government officials, agencies, like whatever information you need for a specific story, they'll make the phone calls, book the interviews, get the information, spread that to the newsroom so that it can be reported. That's one aspect. And then, you know, there's anything from video editing to, you know, like the higher level, like news directors or executive producers who sort of work behind the scenes, orchestrating or producing shows and, you know, our coverage online, as well as TV.
Could you talk about any recent topics you've covered?
You know, when I get asked that question, it's hard because, like I've said, the news cycle is constantly evolving and changing. Recently, Hurricane Milton, that was a big thing for the country in general, and sort of, you know, it was being tracked before it even made landfall, and then during, you know, you have to like know what's happening there and report all of that. That's just sort of the biggest news event that pops in my head recently, that we covered. And that was a national thing, but, you know, there's local things as well. There was a plane crash on Catalina Island. 5 people died in that crash. And that's just a local story. Tragic, of course, both tragic. But those are sort of just the two things that pop into my mind that I've covered in recent days. But again, it's always changing and the stories are always happening. So
to add on to that question, like since you're ingesting so much news and a lot of it, like we talked about earlier, like is very sad and dark, how do you combat burnout?
I try not to let my work follow me home. And that's hard. You know, a lot of the people who are closest to me know that it's something that I struggle with, and I try not to share so much of that with them. You know, I don't want to like drag them in there with me. So I turn to them for comfort, you know, for anything that a regular person needs from the people around them. And I found that that's been the best for me, to just being able to keep doing what I do for work and also just living. Yeah, but the burnout is real, especially with my schedule, you know, because I'm awake when most of the world is asleep, and that is not easy.
For student journalists who are just starting to get into this kind of field and experiencing everything firsthand, what kind of advice would you give to them who are getting backlash for touching on more like politics or like more hard-hitting topics? What advice would you give to them when they're getting backlash from the public?
As a student journalist, so writing for school publications, I would just say stay steadfast in what you're doing. You know, as long as you know that you're doing it to the best of your ability, you're getting all the information that you need, and presenting that in a responsible way, I think that's the best you can do. I think there's always going to be negative feedback because people just have opinions, and you know, there have been times where I've been hesitant to even say what my job is because of people's views towards news in general. It can be tough, but all I can do is what I do. All I can do is make sure that I'm mindful and responsible and accurate. And I'm sorry that if you've ever received that, because, I know that people who become journalists do it with a greater sense of, with a greater calling to sort of, be that voice. But we're still human, right? And so it's just a constant battle that I don't think any journalist doesn't deal with on a pretty constant basis.
I was wondering if you could say a little bit about what sorts of political news are the most popular that you've seen on your channel, and also are there any differences between the most popular sorts of stories between the different social media, so TikTok versus Instagram and so on?
So 2 races in California were LA County and then California are the race for the empty U.S. Senate seat. So we have Adam Schiff and Steve Garvey running for it. And then we have the LA County District Attorney's race, where we have the incumbent, George Cascone, who's received plenty of backlash for his policies as a prosecutor. So those are two races that are being scrutinized right now. And we've had forum/debates with all of those candidates because we know that people are keeping a close eye on those races. As far as, how they're covered or viewed on different platforms, I'll say that Facebook tends to skew towards an older audience. So, naturally those comments and that feedback is going to be very different from ones you'll receive or see on TikTok. Same content is posted across all platforms. It's just how it's received based on the audience.
I'm going to take the holding the microphone purview and ask. So I'm curious actually also about election reporting. It feels like, and I could be completely wrong on this, but it feels like election reporting has grown bigger and bigger as a part of it infiltrating into everything over time. And I was wondering if it seems like that's true, and if so, to the extent to which it feels like it's the personalities in the election versus the extent to which the fact that so much of we get our news from every direction, right? With the digital platforms, it's not just oh, I read the newspaper, or oh, I turned on the television or listened to the radio. It's just everywhere. And so to what extent that media landscape around election reporting has become so large because of, has it? And if so, to what extent the digital platform versus the election or the personalities in the elections have shaped that?
I think that's a very good observation. I personally would probably agree with that, just because, it's what you see. I'll look at my phone and it's what I see. And I do think that the personalities do play a little part in it. It's become a bit theatrical at times. So obviously it's important to sort of differentiate that between the actual issues at hand. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
My question is, what do you believe the relevance is of the general public understanding the news stories if the news stories don't directly affect them? For the stories such as the hurricane, what do you think the relevance is of the general public knowing about these stories when there's no relation of it towards?
Thank you for that question. I think it's something that has naturally just started to happen because of social media. Whether people need this information, if you live on the other side of the country, but there's a hurricane that's affecting this other side of the country, why would you need to know, really? You don't need to evacuate. You don't, your home is not in danger. But it's there. People are posting about it, and someone 3,000 miles away has access to it. I can't say whether they need that information or not. But I think it's people in general just wanting to know what's happening. It's stories. It's human interest, and not in the sense that obviously this is a very tragic story, but it's humans wanting to know about other humans, and that information just being on their phone. Yeah.
All right, so I just want to go ahead and thank you so much for coming today, and I wanted to thank Kristine, and I wanted to thank everyone for sharing your questions. If we can just have a round of applause for all of us.